The sound of twisted metal and shattering glass tore through the silence of Lakeshore Drive on that cold March night. Rain hammered against the windshield as a red supercar spun out of control, slammed into the concrete barrier, and crumpled like paper. The impact echoed across the empty highway, leaving behind nothing but wreckage, smoke, and the faint hiss of leaking fuel. Inside the destroyed vehicle lay a man, unconscious, blood slowly tracing a line from his temple down his cheek. His name was Silas Monroe. At 42, Silas was one of the most powerful real estate developers in Chicago, a man who built towering skyscrapers, moved millions with a single phone call, and ruled boardrooms with an iron will. But in that moment, none of that mattered. For 3 days, Silas drifted between life and darkness in the intensive care unit at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Machines beeped steadily beside his bed. Nurses whispered in hushed tones. Surgeons monitored swelling in his brain, uncertain whether he would wake at all. When his eyes finally fluttered open, the world felt distant, blurred, unreal. A soft female voice broke through the fog. "Mr. Monroe, can you hear me?" Silas blinked slowly, trying to focus. White ceiling, fluorescent lights, the faint scent of antiseptic. His throat was dry. His head throbbed as if someone were striking it from the inside. "Where am I?" "You're in the hospital," said Dr. Helen Crawford, the lead neurologist. "You were in a serious accident." Silas tried to move, but pain surged through his body, forcing a quiet groan from his lips. "Do you know your name?" He stared at her, confused. "My name?" A subtle tension filled the room. "Yes," she said gently. "Can you tell me your name?" Silas searched his mind. Nothing. No sound, no image, no memory. "I don't know," he whispered. The silence that followed was heavy. Dr. Crawford exchanged a glance with the nurse beside her. Then she leaned closer, her voice careful, steady. "Your name is Silas Monroe. You suffered a severe traumatic brain injury. Memory loss is common in cases like yours." Silas repeated the name silently. Silas Monroe. It felt like someone else's life, someone else's identity. Over the next several days, a parade of strangers filled his hospital room. Men in tailored suits, lawyers with leather briefcases, executives clutching tablets and folders. They spoke of billion-dollar projects, corporate mergers, and development contracts. They argued quietly in corners. They whispered about deadlines and market shares. But to Silas, every face was unfamiliar. Every word sounded hollow. One man in particular seemed agitated. Tall, sharp-eyed, impeccably dressed. "Silas, we need your signature," he insisted, holding out a document. "The investors are waiting. This deal is worth over $200 million. Silas stared at the papers, then slowly shook his head. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't understand any of this." The man froze. "What do you mean you don't understand?" he snapped. "This is your empire. You built it." Silas studied him calmly. "If that's true," he said quietly, "then why does it feel like I'm standing in someone else's life?" The room fell silent. Later that week, Silas was discharged from the hospital and driven to his penthouse overlooking downtown Chicago, 80 floors above the city, floor-to-ceiling windows, imported Italian furniture, abstract art worth more than most houses, a private elevator, a wine collection older than many of his employees. Yet as he stepped inside, a strange emptiness wrapped around him. It was perfect, and it meant nothing. A woman in her late 50s approached hesitantly, her eyes moist. "Welcome home, Mr. Monroe," she said. "I'm Evelyn. I've worked for you for 15 years. Silas looked at her. "I'm sorry," he said softly, "but I don't remember you." Her lips trembled. "That's okay," she whispered. I'm glad you're alive." Silas wandered through the massive apartment that night, his footsteps echoing in the hollow rooms. He passed empty guest bedrooms, untouched dining tables, silent hallways. For the first time, a question rose inside him, quiet, unsettling, impossible to ignore. Who was I before the accident? And why does it feel like I lost more than just my memory? Outside, the lights of Chicago shimmered endlessly, unaware that, in a matter of days, a small homeless girl would step into Silas Monroe's path and change his life forever. Before the story begins, please note that it explores meaningful themes of family, humanity, and personal responsibility. This content is intended to encourage thoughtful reflection. We invite you to continue when you feel ready. Silas Monroe barely slept that first night back in his penthouse. The silence was too loud. The rooms were too big. Every footstep echoed through the polished marble floors, like a reminder that he was alone inside a life that no longer felt like his own. He wandered from room to room, touching the backs of leather chairs, brushing his fingers along cold glass tables, standing before abstract paintings that looked more like emotional outbursts than art. Everything around him screamed wealth, power, success, and yet nothing stirred a single memory. Nothing felt familiar. At dawn, he stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching Chicago wake up. The city stretched endlessly beneath him. Traffic building, lights flickering off, people heading to work, chasing dreams, feeding families, struggling, hoping. Somewhere in that vast maze of streets and lives, he had once belonged. But now, he felt like a visitor in his own world. A soft knock broke the silence. "Mr. Monroe?" came a gentle voice. He turned to see the woman from the night before, standing hesitantly near the doorway. "Evelyn," she said, offering a small, nervous smile. "Your housekeeper." "Please," Silas replied quietly. "Come in." She stepped inside, wringing her hands together. There was something fragile in her posture, as if she were afraid that one wrong word might shatter what little peace he had. "Can I get you breakfast?" she asked. "Maybe later," he said, then paused. "Evelyn, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What kind of man was I?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. "I mean," Silas added, "before the accident, what was I like?" Evelyn hesitated, eyes lowering to the floor. "You don't have to protect me," he said gently. "I need to know." She inhaled slowly. "You were very focused," she said carefully. "Your work was everything." "That's not an answer," Silas said softly. "Was I kind?" Her silence said enough. He waited. Finally she spoke. "You were demanding, strict. You liked things done perfectly and quickly. Did I ever thank you?" She shook her head, almost apologetically. "No, sir." "Did I ever ask about your family?" Her eyes shimmered. "No." Silas felt a dull ache form beneath his ribs. "How long have you worked for me?" 15 years? 15 years, he repeated slowly. "And I never once asked about your life." Evelyn swallowed hard. "You paid me well. I never complained." "But you deserved more than money," he said. "You deserved respect." Something shifted in her expression, as if a wall she'd built long ago had cracked. "Thank you," she whispered. Later that morning, Silas insisted on going to his office. 2 floors of glass and steel in the heart of downtown. Hundreds of employees. His name emblazoned on polished marble in the lobby. Monroe Development Group. The moment he stepped inside, the energy changed. Conversations hushed. Footsteps slowed. Eyes dropped. Fear, he realized. They were afraid of him. A young assistant rushed toward him, nearly tripping over her heels. "Mr. Monroe, good morning," she said, breathless. "Your schedule is full. 3 meetings, 2 conference calls, and—" "Stop," Silas said gently. She froze. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," he said. "You didn't." She blinked, confused. "May I ask your name?" he continued. Her eyes widened. "Julia," she said. "I've been your executive assistant for 4 years." "And how am I to work for?" he asked. She hesitated. Around them, employees pretended not to listen. "Please," he said, "tell me the truth." Julia swallowed. "You were intimidating. You demanded excellence." "And you didn't tolerate mistakes." "Did I ever apologize when I was wrong?" "No." "Did I ever raise my voice?" Her shoulders tightened. "Often," Silas closed his eyes briefly. "Thank you for being honest," he said. Throughout the day, he walked through departments, speaking with employees, asking simple questions. "How long have you worked here? Do you enjoy your job? Do you have children?" Most stared at him in disbelief. Some answered cautiously. Others opened up slowly, as if unsure whether kindness from him was a trap. One man in his early 30s stood out. His name was Marcus. "I was fired by you once," Marcus said quietly. Silas stiffened. "Why?" "I was late," Marcus replied. 5 minutes. My mother had collapsed that morning. I stayed until the ambulance arrived. A knot formed in Silas's chest. "And I fired you for that?" "Yes, in front of everyone." "Did I even ask what happened?" Marcus shook his head. "No, sir." Silas stared at the floor, shame burning through him. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Marcus looked stunned. You never said that before." By late afternoon, Silas felt exhausted, not physically, but emotionally. Every story chipped away at the image of the man he had been. Successful, brilliant, respected, and cruel. That evening, Graham Holt requested a private meeting. Tall, commanding, with sharp eyes and an expensive tailored suit, Graham had been Silas's right hand for nearly a decade. They sat across from each other in Silas's office. "Let's not waste time," Graham said coolly. "You're different." Silas met his gaze. "That seems obvious. You're hesitating, questioning decisions, showing weakness." "Or humanity," Silas replied. Graham scoffed. "Humanity doesn't build empires. Fear does. Pressure does. Ruthlessness does." Silas leaned back. "And did that make me happy?" Graham frowned. "It made you powerful." Silas stood and walked toward the window overlooking the city. "Tell me something," he said. "How many people did I step on to build this?" Graham didn't answer. "Tell me," Silas repeated. "Enough to get here," Graham said flatly. Silas turned slowly. "And how many lives did I ruin along the way?" "Collateral damage," Graham shrugged. "You can't make billions without casualties." The words struck Silas harder than he expected. "Leave," he said quietly. Graham stared at him. "What?" "I said leave." Graham rose, irritated. "You're emotional. The accident messed with your head. Don't make decisions you'll regret." Silas's voice dropped. "I regret plenty, but this conversation won't be one of them." After Graham left, Silas remained alone in the office long after sunset. The building emptied, the city darkened, and for the first time since waking up, he allowed himself to feel what he had been avoiding: grief. Not for the life he lost, but for the life he wasted. 42 years. And how many moments of kindness, how many chances to connect, how many people who needed help, encouragement, understanding. He returned home late that night. The penthouse felt colder than ever. He poured himself a glass of expensive whiskey, took a single sip, then set it down untouched. Standing in the dim living room, surrounded by luxury, he whispered into the emptiness, "If this was who I was, I don't want to be him anymore." That night, sleep finally came. But it brought no peace. He dreamed of faceless people calling his name, of doors closing, of children standing on sidewalks, invisible. When he woke just before dawn, his heart was pounding. A strange restlessness filled him, as if something, or someone, was waiting. He showered, dressed simply, and decided to walk. No driver, no schedule, no meetings. Just him and the city. He wandered through downtown, past office buildings, cafes, subway stations. Then, without knowing why, his feet carried him south. The streets changed gradually. Skyscrapers gave way to older buildings, boutiques to corner stores, tourists to workers, wealth to struggle. By midday, he found himself near one of his company's largest construction sites, a luxury residential tower scheduled to generate hundreds of millions in profit. Tall fences surrounded the area. Cranes towered overhead. And then he saw her. A small girl sat on the sidewalk, knees pulled tightly to her chest. Her clothes were thin, worn, mismatched. Beside her sat an elderly woman, coughing violently into a stained cloth. The girl held a cardboard sign in shaky handwriting. "Please help. My grandma is sick." Silas stopped. Something in his chest tightened. People hurried past them. Some glanced briefly, then looked away. Others stepped around them as if they weren't there at all. Invisible. Silas felt a chill crawl up his spine. Slowly, he approached. The girl looked up. Her eyes were large, dark, tired, but alert. Hope and fear mingled within them. He crouched to her level. "Hi," he said softly. "What's your name?" "Elora," she answered. "And this is my grandma, Mrs. Rowan Finch." The old woman lifted her gaze, offering a faint nod. Silas studied them. The fragile woman, the protective child, the cardboard sign, the thin blanket, and behind them, towering. Above it all, stood his luxury building. Concrete, steel, glass, a monument to wealth. The contrast struck him like a blow. "Why are you here?" he asked gently. Elora hesitated, then whispered, "Grandma needs medicine." The clinic said it's too expensive. Mrs. Finch coughed again, turning away. Silas reached slowly into his pocket, pulling out several bills. He handed them to Elora. Her eyes widened. "Sir, this is too much." "It's not," he said quietly. "It's not enough." She stared at him for a moment, then said something that stopped his breath. "Thank you for seeing me." Silas remained crouched on the sidewalk long after he had handed the money to the girl. Her small fingers clutched, the bills as if they might vanish at any second. She stared at them, then up at him, then back down again, uncertain whether this moment was real. "Sir," she whispered. "Are you sure?" Silas nodded. "I'm sure." She turned away, pressing the cloth to her lips. When she pulled it back, faint streaks of blood stained the fabric. Elora lowered her voice, as if afraid the illness might hear. "The clinic said it's an infection in her lungs. They gave her medicine before, but it ran out. Now they say she needs tests in a hospital, but we don't have insurance or money." Silas glanced behind them. Tower cranes loomed overhead. Workers in hard hats moved across scaffolding. Concrete mixers churned. A luxury tower where future residents would pay millions for a single apartment. And here, just a few feet away, a child begged for medicine to keep her grandmother alive. The contrast struck him like a punch. "Where do you live?" he asked. Elora hesitated, then pointed down the street. "Under the bridge, near the river." Silas followed her finger. 200 yards away, beneath the shadow of a concrete overpass, he could see dark shapes. Makeshift shelters, piles of discarded belongings, plastic tarps fluttering in the wind. Something in his chest tightened. "Can I walk you back?" he asked. Elora exchanged a glance with her grandmother. "We don't want to bother you," Mrs. Finch murmured weakly. "It wouldn't be a bother," Silas said. "I'd like to." They walked slowly. With every step away from the towering building, the world changed. The polished streets faded into cracked pavement. The smell of coffee and fresh bread gave way to the stench of damp concrete, garbage, and stagnant water. Traffic roared overhead. Pigeons scattered from half-eaten scraps. The air felt colder, heavier. Elora led him between two massive concrete pillars. There, tucked into a narrow space between shadows, stood their home, if it could be called that. Plastic tarps were tied together with fraying ropes. Cardboard sheets reinforced the walls. A thin blanket hung across the entrance, serving as a door. Inside, the space was barely large enough for two thin. Mattresses, a battered suitcase, a dented cooking pot, and a small pile of worn children's books. Silas froze. This was where they slept. This was where they ate. This was where a 7-year-old girl tried to build a life. Elora knelt to straighten the blanket, embarrassed. "It's not very big," she said softly. "But it keeps the rain out. Mostly." Silas swallowed. "May I come in?" She nodded. He stepped carefully inside, crouching low to avoid hitting his head. The air smelled faintly of soap and smoke. There was a fragile sense of order. Clothes folded neatly, books stacked carefully, a cracked cup placed beside a small candle. "You like to read?" Silas asked, lifting one of the books. Elara's face brightened.
Yes, Grandma taught me.
Mrs. Finch lowered herself slowly onto a mattress, her breathing shallow.
I was a teacher, she said, before I got sick.
Silas looked at her with surprise.
For 30 years, she continued. 2nd grade.
Elara smiled proudly.
She says books can take you anywhere, even if you don't have money.
Silas opened one of the books, an old, battered copy of Charlotte's Web.
Would you read to us?
Elara asked shyly. The request caught him off guard. I don't know if I remember how, he admitted.
That's okay, she said. We can learn together.
He sat cross-legged on the concrete floor and began to read. At first, his voice was uncertain, awkward, but as the words flowed, something strange happened. The noise of the city faded. The roar of traffic softened. For a few minutes, there was only a story, a child's attentive eyes, and an old woman listening with quiet gratitude. When he finished the chapter, Elara clapped softly.
You read really well, she said.
Silas felt warmth spread through his chest. No boardroom had ever made him feel this way.
How do you get food?
He asked gently. Elara shrugged. Sometimes people help. Sometimes restaurants give us leftovers. Sometimes we don't eat much. And school? He asked.
She shook her head. I can't go. Grandma needs me.
Silas looked at Mrs. Finch.
She gets confused sometimes,
Elara explained.
So I stay close.
Silas stared at the small girl before him, 7 years old, and already carrying the weight of the world. You're very brave, he said quietly. Elara smiled shyly.
Grandma says courage isn't being big. It's doing what you have to, even when you're scared.
Mrs. Finch reached for her hand.
She takes care of me, she whispered. I used to take care of her when her parents died.
Now it's her turn. Something inside Silas cracked. 3 hours passed without him noticing. They talked, they laughed, they shared stories. Elara showed him how she washed clothes in a nearby public fountain, how she collected cardboard for insulation, how she saved bottle caps and coins in a small tin.
This is my treasure box,
she said proudly. Silas felt his throat tighten. As evening approached, the wind turned colder. Mrs. Finch shivered, wrapping her thin sweater tighter around her frail shoulders. Silas stood. I need to go, he said, but I'll come back. Elara looked up quickly. Really? Yes, he said firmly. Tomorrow. Mrs. Finch studied him for a moment.
You don't have to, she said. Most people don't.
Silas met her gaze.
I want to.
He walked away slowly, glancing back several times. Elara stood in the fading light, waving with both hands, her small figure swallowed by the shadows of the bridge. That night, Silas drove to the nearest pharmacy. He bought every medication listed on Mrs. Finch's prescription. He didn't ask a price. He didn't look at the total. Then he filled a cart with groceries. Rice, bread, fruit, milk, soup, chicken, blankets, warm clothes. 3 trips. By the time he returned beneath the bridge, his arms ached. Elara gasped when she saw him.
Sir, you came back.
I said I would. Mrs. Finch stared at the bags, tears spilling down her cheeks.
No one has ever done this for us, she whispered.
Silas knelt, placing the food carefully on the ground. You didn't deserve to suffer like this, he said quietly. Elara hugged him without warning. Her arms were thin, but the warmth of her embrace nearly stole his breath.
Thank you for seeing us,
she murmured into his coat. For the first time since the accident, Silas felt something unmistakably real. Purpose. That night, back in his empty penthouse, the silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt wrong. He stood by the window, staring down at the endless city. Somewhere below, beneath the cold bridge, a little girl and her grandmother were falling asleep on thin mattresses, wrapped in donated blankets, holding on to hope. At that moment, Silas Monroe knew something with absolute certainty. His life would never be the same. Because once you truly see someone, you can never unsee them. Silas returned to the bridge the next morning, not with a driver, not with security, just himself. The air was cold and damp. Traffic thundered overhead. Pigeons scattered as he approached the narrow space between the concrete pillars. Elara spotted him first.
Sir!
she called, scrambling to her feet.
You came back!
I told you I would, Silas said, kneeling beside her. Mrs. Finch was sitting upright, wrapped in a blanket, her breathing still shallow but steadier than the day before. You look a little better, Silas said gently. The medicine helped, she replied softly. Thank you. Silas nodded. We're going to do more than just medicine. He had already made several phone calls before sunrise. Within an hour, a private medical transport arrived. 2 nurses stepped out, followed by a respiratory specialist. Alara's eyes widened. Is this for Grandma? Silas nodded. She needs proper tests and treatment. Mrs. Finch tried to protest. We can't afford. You don't need to, Silas interrupted calmly. Let them take care of you. The nurses gently helped her onto a stretcher. Alara clutched her hand the entire time, refusing to let go. I'll come with you, Silas said. At Northwestern Memorial Hospital, doctors immediately admitted Mrs. Finch for testing. X-rays, blood work, CT scans. Hours passed. Silas sat beside Alara in the waiting room. She swung her legs nervously, staring at the floor. Have you ever been in a hospital before? He asked. She shook her head. Only the clinic. After a long while, a physician approached. Mr. Monroe? He asked. Silas stood. She has advanced pneumonia and early-stage tuberculosis, the doctor said. It's serious, but treatable. With aggressive care, she has a good chance. Alara exhaled shakily. She's going to be okay, she whispered. We'll do everything we can, the doctor assured her. Silas arranged a private room. He arranged specialists. He arranged medication and long-term care. By nightfall, Mrs. Finch was resting comfortably, connected to IV lines and monitors. For the first time in weeks, she slept peacefully. Alara curled up in a chair beside the bed, exhausted. Silas draped his coat gently over her shoulders. When he finally left the hospital, the city was already glowing with evening lights. But instead of returning to his penthouse, he drove south. He wanted to understand more. He spent the next several days walking through neighborhoods he had only ever seen from tinted windows. South Side, back of the yards, Englewood. He spoke to families living in shelters, in overcrowded apartments, in abandoned buildings. Stories poured out. A man who lost his job after a workplace injury, a mother fleeing domestic violence, teenagers aging out of foster care with nowhere to go, elderly couples choosing between rent and medication. Every conversation added another layer to a reality he had never allowed himself to see. One afternoon, he returned to his construction site. Cranes moved steel beams into place. Workers poured concrete. The skeleton of a luxury tower rose into the sky. Graham Holt was waiting for him. We need to talk, Graham said sharply. Then talk, Silas replied. Graham gestured toward the site. This project is bleeding money. You halted 2 supplier contracts. You delayed the interior bidding. Investors are asking questions. Silas looked up at the half-built tower. How many units? He asked. 240 luxury apartments, starting at $2 million each. And affordable housing? Silas asked. Graham blinked. None. Why? Silas turned to face him. Change the plan. Excuse me? Add 100 units of affordable housing. Real affordable housing. Not marketing nonsense. Graham laughed. You're insane. That'll slash profits by at least 30%. Then slash them. You can't just rewrite a $300 million project. Watch me. Graham's face darkened. The board will never approve this. Then they can vote me out. Silas walked past him toward the temporary site office. By the end of the week, chaos erupted. Emails flooded in. Emergency meetings were called. Stock analysts downgraded company forecasts. Graham stormed into Silas's office. You're destroying everything we built. No, Silas replied calmly. I'm building something different. Investors will sue. Let them. You're burning bridges. Some bridges need to burn. That evening, Silas did something no one expected. He called Evelyn. Can you help me pack? He asked. She was silent for a moment. Pack? Where? I'm leaving the penthouse. Within 2 days, the listing went live. His 80-floor luxury apartment? Sold. His collection of exotic cars? Sold. His vacation properties? Sold.
Financial news outlets exploded. Billionaire liquidates assets amid mental health concerns. Is Silas Monroe losing his grip? Shockwaves in Chicago's real estate market. Graham wasted no time. He summoned Silas to an emergency board meeting. The room was tense. "You're acting irrationally," Graham said, addressing the directors. The accident clearly impaired his judgment. Silas sat calmly. A senior board member spoke. "Silas, are you prepared to step down as CEO?" "No," Silas answered. "But I am prepared to walk away." The room erupted. "You're throwing away billions!" "I'm investing in people. You can't run a corporation like a charity." "Then I won't run a corporation." Silas pushed his chair back and stood. "Buy out my shares." Silence. "Effective immediately," he continued. "I resign from all executive duties." Graham stared at him in disbelief. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," Silas said, "but not today." By the following week, the transaction was complete. Silas Monroe was no longer a billionaire CEO. He was simply Silas. The funds from the sale went directly into a newly formed nonprofit foundation. The goal? Build permanent housing, schools, clinics, and job training centers for families living below the poverty line. He bought 10 acres of neglected industrial land on Chicago's southeast side. Construction began immediately. He moved into a small apartment near the site, but most nights he slept on a cot inside a temporary trailer beside the build. And every day he returned to the hospital to visit Mrs. Finch and Alara. The treatment was working. Slowly, color returned to Mrs. Finch's face. Her cough lessened. Strength crept back into her frail body. One afternoon, as Silas helped Alara with homework in the hospital cafeteria, she looked up suddenly. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked. Silas paused. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I know I can't stop." She studied him for a moment, then nodded as if that answer was enough. Weeks passed. The foundation project gained momentum. Architects volunteered. Doctors donated time. Contractors offered reduced rates. Community leaders stepped in. Local churches and food banks partnered. The empty industrial lot slowly transformed. Framing rose. Concrete was poured. Playgrounds took shape. Classrooms emerged. Small homes lined up in neat rows. Meanwhile, Graham Holt and the former board prepared their counterattack. They hired Victor Langford, one of the most aggressive corporate attorneys in Illinois. The filing arrived on a gray Monday morning. Petition for legal guardianship and financial control. They claimed Silas was mentally impaired due to traumatic brain injury. They demanded court-appointed supervision over his finances, foundation, and personal affairs. The goal was clear: take everything back. Evelyn burst into the site trailer, pale. "They're trying to declare you incompetent." Silas read the papers slowly. "This could freeze all your assets," she said. "Stop construction. Shut down the foundation." Silas exhaled. "When is the hearing?" 2 weeks. That evening, he sat alone on the edge of the construction site, watching workers pack up for the day. The skeleton of the future. The community stood against the setting sun. Alara and Mrs. Finch joined him. "Grandma's getting discharged next week," Alara announced proudly. "That's wonderful," Silas smiled. Mrs. Finch placed a hand on his arm. "We heard about the lawsuit." Silas nodded. "They want control. And if they win? Everything stops." Alara frowned. "But all these people." Silas looked at the half-built home. "I won't let them take this." Mrs. Finch squeezed his hand. "Then don't fight alone." Over the next days, something unexpected happened. Families he had helped came forward. Doctors, nurses, construction workers, former employees, volunteers, people whose lives had been touched by his actions. They wrote letters, signed affidavits, agreed to testify. When the court date arrived, the room overflowed. Graham sat on one side, flanked by lawyers. Silas sat on the other, surrounded by families, children, elderly couples, and workers in dusty boots. Victor Langford stood confidently. "Mr. Monroe's recent behavior demonstrates impaired judgment, liquidating assets, abandoning corporate responsibilities, diverting massive funds into projects with no financial return." He gestured sharply. "This is not rational behavior." The judge turned to Silas. "Mister, Monroe, do you understand the nature of these proceedings?
Yes, Your Honor.
Do you believe you are capable of managing your own affairs?
Silas rose.
I do.
Before the judge could respond, a small voice spoke up.
May I say something?
Alara stood, hands trembling slightly. Silas turned, startled. The judge nodded gently.
Go ahead.
She took a deep breath. He didn't lose his mind, she said clearly. He found his heart. The courtroom fell silent.
And because of him, she continued,
my grandma is alive.
I have a bed, I go to school, and these people have homes.
She pointed to the families behind her. If loving people makes you crazy,
then maybe the world needs more crazy.
No one spoke.
The judge removed his glasses and leaned back slowly in his chair. The courtroom was so quiet that Silas could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning.
Every face was turned toward Alara.
The small girl stood alone in the center aisle, her hands clasped tightly in front of her chest.
Her voice trembled slightly,
but she did not look away.
If loving people makes you crazy, she said, then maybe the world needs more crazy.
For a long moment, no one moved. Not the lawyers, not the judge, not the rows of spectators packed tightly into the benches.
Then a soft sob echoed from the back of the room.
A woman wiped her eyes. Another followed. Even some of the court clerks looked down, blinking rapidly.
Victor Langford cleared his throat sharply, breaking the spell.
Your Honor, he said, regaining his composure.
Emotional testimony cannot replace medical facts. Mr. Monroe suffered a traumatic brain injury. His sudden behavioral changes, extreme financial decisions, and emotional impulsivity all point to impaired judgment. He turned toward Silas. Mr. Monroe, do you deny liquidating hundreds of millions of dollars in assets within weeks of your accident?
I do not, Silas replied calmly. Do you deny abandoning your corporate responsibilities?
I resigned. Do you deny redirecting massive sums into projects with no financial return?
I redirected them into lives.
Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Langford's jaw tightened.
Isn't it true,
he pressed, that prior to your accident, you had no history of philanthropy on this scale?
That's true.
Isn't it also true that you now spend most of your time in homeless shelters, construction sites, and hospitals?
Yes.
Langford raised his voice slightly. Doesn't that strike you as a radical personality shift? Silas paused. Then he answered steadily.
It strikes me as a correction.
A low wave of whispers swept through the gallery. Langford slammed a folder onto the podium.
Your Honor, this is not about kindness. This is about competence.
Mr. Monroe is dismantling a billion-dollar enterprise based on emotional impulses. My clients are asking the court to intervene before irreversible damage is done. The judge leaned forward. Mr.
Monroe, he said,
if I grant this petition, your assets will be placed under guardianship. You will retain personal freedom, but you will lose control of your foundation, your finances, and your projects. Silas nodded. I understand. And if I deny it, the judge continued, your former partners will lose their final legal avenue to stop you. Silas met his gaze. I understand. The judge folded his hands. Why should I trust that you are acting rationally? Silas took a slow breath. Because for the first time in my life, my actions are aligned with my conscience, he said. Before the accident, I built towers. I made money. I won awards. But I ignored suffering. I ignored people. He gestured toward the families behind him. These people were invisible to me. Now they are my neighbors, my friends, my family. Langford interjected sharply. That is sentiment, not strategy. Silas turned to face him. Maybe that's the problem, he said quietly. For too long, strategy replaced humanity. Silence filled the courtroom again. The judge removed his glasses and rubbed his temples. I will recess for 30 minutes, he announced. When I return, I will deliver my ruling. The gavel struck. Everyone rose. In the hallway outside the courtroom, tension hung thick in the air. Graham Holt stood near a window, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Silas stepped outside, needing air. Alara followed, her small hand slipping into his. Are you scared? She asked softly. Yes, he admitted. A little. She squeezed his fingers. Me too. They stood there together, watching traffic stream below. "I don't want them to take everything away," she whispered. Silas knelt so they were eye to eye. "Listen to me," he said gently. "No matter what happens in that room, they can't take what really matters." She searched his face. "What matters?" "You," he said. "And Grandma, and every person we've helped. That stays." Her eyes shimmered, but she nodded. Inside, Graham approached Victor Langford. "If we lose this," Graham muttered, "everything collapses." Langford straightened his tie. "Courts favor logic, not emotion. We still have strong grounds." "But that girl—" "Sympathy fades," Langford snapped. "Control endures." 30 minutes later, the courtroom filled again. Everyone stood as the judge returned. The air felt heavy, electric. The judge seated himself slowly. "I have reviewed the medical evaluations, financial records, and testimony," he began. Silas felt Delara's grip tighten. "This case is unusual," the judge continued. "Mr. Monroe's behavioral shift is undeniable, but so is its clarity of purpose." Langford stiffened. "The question before this court is not whether Mr. Monroe's life has changed," the judge said, "but whether he lacks the capacity to decide how to live it." Silas held his breath. "After careful consideration, I find no legal basis to declare Mr. Monroe incompetent." A sharp intake of breath rippled across the room. Alara gasped softly. "The petition for guardianship is denied." For a moment, there was silence. Then the room erupted. Gasps, sobs, applause quickly silenced by the bailiff's stern command for order. Alara burst into tears, throwing her arms around Silas's neck. "We won!" she cried. Silas closed his eyes, pressing his face into her hair. Across the aisle, Graham stood frozen. Langford slowly packed his papers, his jaw rigid. As people poured out of the courtroom, reporters swarmed. "Mr. Monroe, a statement?" "Is this the end of your business career?" Silas raised a hand politely. "My life isn't ending," he said calmly. "It's finally beginning." That night he returned to the construction site. Floodlights illuminated the skeletal frames of future homes. Workers still labored, pouring foundations, welding beams, moving steadily forward. Silas walked among them, thanking each one personally. "You didn't have to come back tonight," a foreman said. "I wanted to," Silas replied. Later he sat with Alara and Mrs. Finch in the small trailer that served as their temporary home. Mrs. Finch held his hands gently. "You stood your ground," she said proudly. "I almost lost it," Silas admitted. "But you didn't," she replied, "because your heart is stronger than fear." Alara leaned against his shoulder. "Does this mean we can keep building?" she asked. "Yes," Silas smiled. "It means we're just getting started." Over the following weeks, construction accelerated. Donations increased. Volunteers multiplied. Local businesses partnered with the foundation. Schools pledged resources. Medical groups offered free clinics. What had begun as one man's choice now grew into a movement. Yet Graham Holt was not finished. Behind closed doors, he rallied former investors. He leaked internal documents. He planted stories questioning Silas's motives. Headlines grew darker. Billionaire savior or delusional ego project? Is Monroe's foundation a financial time bomb? Funding partners began to hesitate. Contractors demanded higher guarantees. Suppliers delayed shipments. One morning, Silas arrived to find construction halted. "What happened?" he asked. The site manager shook his head. "Suppliers pulled out. Insurance companies are backing away. They say the legal risk is too high." Silas felt his stomach drop. That afternoon, he received the call. Graham's voice was smooth. "You won in court," he said, "but the market is another battlefield." "What do you want?" Silas asked. "Step away from the foundation," Graham replied. "Return control to the board. I can stabilize everything." Silas looked out over the silent construction site. Rows of half-built homes stood frozen. Children's murals unfinished. Playground frames abandoned. "You're using these people as leverage," Silas said quietly. "I'm using reality," Graham answered. "You can't save everyone." Silas closed his eyes. That evening, he gathered the families. Hundreds stood beneath temporary lights waiting. He climbed onto a small platform. "They're trying to stop us," he said simply. "They're cutting funding, blocking supplies, threatening lawsuits." Murmurs spread. "I don't know if we can finish everything we planned," he continued, "but I promise this. I will not walk away." A man stepped forward. "We'll help," he said. A woman followed. "We'll volunteer." A contractor raised his hand. "We'll build at cost." A doctor spoke. "We'll run clinics for free." One by one, voices joined. "We won't let them win." Alara tugged on Silas's sleeve. "See?" she whispered. "You're not alone anymore." Silas looked out over the crowd. Families, workers, children, elderly couples, volunteers. And for the first time, he truly understood. This was no longer his project. It was theirs, and they were ready to fight for it. The morning after Silas spoke to the families, something shifted. It was subtle at first. A few more volunteers arrived earlier than usual. Someone brought hot coffee. Another set up a folding table with homemade sandwiches. A local radio station showed up to interview residents. A church group offered free childcare so parents could help on the site. By noon, the empty construction zone felt alive again. Hammers rang. Saws buzzed. Voices called out instructions. Children chased each other between piles of lumber, laughing as if this dusty patch of land were already home. Silas stood quietly at the edge of the site, watching it all unfold. "You see?" Mrs. Finch said softly beside him. "Hope is contagious." He nodded. Over the next week, donations began to trickle in. $10, $20, $50. Small amounts, but steady. A retired teacher mailed in a handwritten check with a note for the girl who reminded a man how to love. A group of truck drivers organized a fundraiser at a rest stop. High school students held bake sales. A barber shop placed a donation jar on its counter. It wasn't millions, but it was everything. And then, something unexpected happened. A regional news station aired a short segment about the project. They showed footage of Alara reading to younger children, of Mrs. Finch teaching basic literacy classes in a temporary trailer, of volunteers hammering boards into place. The story spread. Emails poured in. Companies offered surplus materials. Medical suppliers donated equipment. Architects volunteered to redesign parts of the project to cut costs. Construction firms agreed to work at cost. Within 2 weeks, work resumed at full speed. Silas didn't return to an office. He wore jeans, steel-toed boots, and a worn jacket. He carried lumber, poured concrete, helped install drywall. At lunch, he sat on overturned buckets beside electricians and plumbers, eating sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. For the first time, he felt part of something real. One afternoon, a man approached hesitantly. He looked to be in his late 50s, his clothes neat but frayed at the edges. "My name is Albert," he said. "I used to manage logistics for a shipping company. Lost my job last year. Been living in my car." Silas shook his hand. "What can I do for you, Albert?" "I heard you might need help organizing supplies and deliveries." Silas smiled. "We need all the help we can get." Within days, Albert had reorganized the chaotic supply chain, cutting waste in half and doubling efficiency. Then came Maria, a former accountant who volunteered to manage donations. Then Tom, a retired contractor who supervised apprentices. Then Lisa, a social worker who helped families transition into stable housing. Slowly, a system took shape. Not perfect, not polished, but alive. Alara became the project's unofficial mascot. She greeted workers each morning, handing out stickers and handwritten notes. "Thank you for building my home. You are a hero. Have a good day." Hardened laborers tucked the notes into their pockets like treasured keepsakes. Mrs. Finch began informal classes under a tent. She taught reading, basic math, and life skills to children and adults alike. People arrived early, eager to learn. "I forgot how much I loved teaching," she told Silas one evening, her eyes shining. "This saved me as much as it saved them." By the 3rd month, the first homes were complete. Small, simple, 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a kitchen, a tiny yard. But to the families who stepped inside, they might as well have been palaces. One mother dropped to her knees, sobbing. "My children have never had their own beds," she whispered. A father stood silently in the doorway, his jaw clenched, eyes wet. "I promise," he said hoarsely. "I will never waste this." Keys were handed out, doors were opened, lights flicked on. That night, for the first time in years, dozens of families slept without fear of rain, cold, or eviction. Silas walked through the people, quiet streets of the new neighborhood, listening to laughter drift through open windows, watching children chase fireflies beneath newly planted trees. He stopped in front of one small house. Inside, Elara and Mrs. Finch were arranging furniture donated by local families. Elara rushed out to meet him. "Look!" she cried, pulling him inside. "We have a real kitchen." Mrs. Finch laughed. "And running water." Silas smiled. Their home was modest, but warm, alive. Over the next months, the community expanded. A school building rose, then a medical clinic, a vocational training center. Gardens replaced cracked asphalt. Playgrounds bloomed where abandoned lots once stood. People who had once lived on the margins now worked together to maintain and protect their neighborhood. Graffiti vanished, trash disappeared, crime dropped. Police officers began stopping by just to chat. Local businesses opened nearby. Hope changed everything. One afternoon, Graham Holt arrived unannounced. His expensive suit looked out of place amid the dust and half-built homes. Silas met him near the community center. "You've built something impressive," Graham admitted. Silas studied him quietly. "You didn't come to compliment me." Graham sighed. "Investors are watching this closely. Some are reconsidering their positions. They think you might have been right." "About what?" Silas asked. "About social impact, long-term stability, reputation." Silas shook his head. "This was never about reputation." Graham hesitated. "They want to talk about partnerships, funding, expansion." Silas glanced around at the bustling site. "I'll consider anything that helps these people," he said. "But I won't compromise why we're here." Graham nodded slowly. "I figured you'd say that." He turned to leave, then paused. "You've changed," he said. "So have you," Silas replied. Graham looked back once more, then walked away. By the 6th month, the first phase of the community was complete. 300 families had moved in. The school opened with 200 students. The clinic treated hundreds more. Local newspapers ran stories. National outlets followed. But Silas declined most interviews. He preferred to remain in the background. One evening, as the sun dipped low, a celebration was held in the central square. Music played. Children danced. Food trucks lined the streets. Neighbors shared dishes from their cultures. Mrs. Finch stood on a small stage holding a microphone. "I taught children for 30 years, she said, "but I never learned as much as I have from this little community." Applause rippled through the crowd. Elara tugged at Silas's sleeve. "Do you want to say something?" she whispered. He shook his head. "This isn't about me." She frowned, then smiled mischievously. She ran onto the stage before he could stop her. "My name is Elara Finch," she said brightly. "And this is my dad." Gasps spread. Silas froze. "He doesn't like attention," she continued. "But he deserves it." The crowd laughed. "Before I met him, my grandma and I lived under a bridge," she said simply. "People walked past us like we were invisible. He didn't." Silence fell. "He lost his memory," she went on. "But he found his heart. And because of that, all of you have homes." Tears shimmered across dozens of faces. Silas felt his chest tighten. Elara turned toward him. "Come here," she said. Reluctantly, he stepped onto the stage. The applause thundered. Elara wrapped her arms around his waist. "This is my family," she declared. "And he is my father." Silas knelt, hugging her tightly. For a moment, the noise faded. There was only her warmth, her trust, her love. Later that night, as lanterns glowed across the square, Silas sat with Mrs. Finch on a wooden bench. "You did this," she said softly. "We did this," he corrected. She smiled. "You gave them permission to hope." Silas looked around at the community, at neighbors chatting, children playing, elders resting peacefully. "Sometimes," he admitted, "I'm afraid my old memories will come back and drag me away from all this." Mrs. Finch placed a hand over his. "Even if they do," she said, "you already know who you are now. He nodded slowly. That night, Silas dreamed, not of boardrooms or contracts, but of small hands in his, of laughter beneath streetlights, of homes glowing softly in the dark. And when he woke, for the first time since the accident, fragments of memory flickered at the edge of his mind. Faces, voices, deals, numbers. They hovered, waiting. Silas sat up in bed, heart pounding. Alara stirred in the room next door. He stood, walking quietly to the window. Below, the community slept peacefully. Hundreds of families, safe, warm, together. Silas whispered into the stillness, "Whatever comes back, I won't forget this." And somewhere deep inside, he knew. The hardest test of his journey was still ahead. Silas woke before dawn, his heart pounding. For a few seconds he lay still, staring at the ceiling of the small room he now called home, trying to steady his breathing. His mind felt different, crowded, restless, as if a locked door had cracked open during the night. Fragments of memory drifted in and out. A glass-walled boardroom, men in tailored suits, a skyline viewed from 80 floors above the city. The weight of authority in his voice, the thrill of control. He sat up slowly, pressing his palms against his temples. The memories weren't complete. Not yet. But they were returning. He stepped quietly into the hallway. The community outside still slept, faint lights glowing in windows, a dog barking somewhere in the distance. Everything felt peaceful. Too peaceful, as if something were about to break it. Over the following days, the memories grew stronger. Names resurfaced, faces sharpened. Meetings replayed themselves. Deals worth hundreds of millions unfolded in precise detail. He remembered the rush, the power, the certainty, the way people bent when he entered a room. And with each returning memory came an uncomfortable truth. He had loved it. Silas didn't tell anyone at first. Not Alara, not Mrs. Finch, not even Evelyn. He carried the burden alone, afraid of what it might mean. One afternoon, while walking through the community center, he overheard 2 volunteers whispering. "Have you noticed?" one murmured. "He seems distracted lately. Maybe the memories are coming back," the other replied softly. Silas turned away, a knot forming in his chest. That night, the call came. A familiar number flashed across his phone. He hesitated, then answered. "Silas," Graham Holt's voice said smoothly. "I hear congratulations are in order. Your little project is gaining national attention." Silas remained silent. "I also hear your memory is improving," Graham continued. "That's good news for everyone." "What do you want, Graham?" Silas asked. "An opportunity," Graham replied. "One that solves all your problems." They met the next day in a private conference room overlooking downtown Chicago, the same room where Silas had once ruled. The city spread below them, sharp and gleaming. "You remember this place?" Graham said, watching him closely. "Yes," Silas admitted. "And you remember what you were capable of?" Silas didn't answer. Graham slid a folder across the table. "Your former partners are prepared to restore your position. Full control, increased equity, expand authority, triple your previous compensation." Silas glanced at the documents. "And in return, you step away from the foundation," Graham said plainly. "Transfer control to a corporate board. Convert it into a tax-efficient development arm. Affordable housing, yes, but with returns." Silas closed the folder. "You want to turn it into another profit machine." "I want to make it sustainable," Graham corrected. "Your way is fragile, emotional, dependent on goodwill. That doesn't last." Silas looked out the window, remembering the community. Children running, families cooking, neighbors laughing. "Neither does greed," he said quietly. Graham leaned forward. "Listen to yourself. You're turning down billions for sentiment. That's not you." Silas met his gaze. "Maybe that's the problem. Maybe I finally stopped being who I was." Graham sighed. "Think carefully. You're standing at a crossroads. One path gives you power, security, legacy. The other gives you uncertainty and endless struggle." Silas stood. "My legacy is already clear." Graham's eyes hardened. Then don't be surprised when reality catches up.
The pressure didn't stop. Banks began tightening credit lines. Regulatory inspections increased. Zoning approvals slowed. Suppliers hesitated again. The foundation's reserves began to shrink. One evening, Evelyn approached Silas with concern etched across her face. "We're running low," she said quietly. "If delays continue, we may have to suspend expansion." Silas nodded. He had known this moment would come. That night, he sat alone in the community square, staring at the half-finished second phase of construction. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on him. His phone buzzed. Another message from Graham. "This offer expires in 48 hours. Silas closed his eyes. Memories surged again. Champagne toasts, private jets, luxury penthouses, global influence. And then another memory surfaced. Alara standing beneath the bridge, holding her cardboard sign. "Thank you for seeing me." His chest tightened. Footsteps approached. He turned to see Alara, clutching her worn, stuffed bear.
"Grandma said you were out here," she whispered.
He smiled faintly. Couldn't sleep. She sat beside him, swinging her legs gently. "You've been quiet lately," she said. He hesitated, then spoke. "My memories are coming back." Her small body stiffened. "Is that bad?" "I don't know," he admitted. "It's confusing." She studied his face carefully.
"Do you remember being my dad?"
He smiled sadly. "Every day."
"Then it's okay," she said firmly.
He frowned. "How can you be so sure?" "Because," she said simply, "even if you remember everything, you still get to choose." Silas looked at her, surprised. "Choose what?" "Choose who you want to be." He exhaled slowly. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Before you met me, did you think you'd ever live like this?"
"No."
"Did you think you'd be happy like this?"
"No."
"Are you?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes." She nodded, as if confirming something she already knew.
"Then that's your answer."
The next morning, Silas called a meeting.
Staff, volunteers, community leaders, and residents gathered in the central hall.
Faces filled the room. Hopeful, anxious, trusting. Silas stepped forward. "I need to be honest with all of you," he began.
"My memories are returning."
"My former partners have offered to restore my old life, with even more power and money." A hush fell. "If I accept," he continued, "this foundation would change. It would become another corporate project. Some good might remain, but its heart would be gone." Murmurs spread. "I won't lie," he said. "This path we're on is hard. There will be setbacks. There will be sacrifices. And there will be fear." He paused. "But there will also be purpose." Silas lifted his head. "I choose this. I choose you. I choose this community." Applause erupted. People stood. Some cried. Others embraced. Alara rushed forward, throwing her arms around him. Later that evening, Silas wrote a single email. To Graham Holt. Subject, my answer. I remember who I was, and I choose not to be him again. Take your billions. I've already found my wealth. He pressed send. The following months were not easy. Funds remained tight. Expansion slowed. But stability returned. Partnerships strengthened. Trust deepened. The community learned to sustain itself. One night, Silas sat with Mrs. Finch as she graded papers from her adult literacy class. "You faced your past," she said gently, "and you won." "I don't feel like I won," he admitted. She smiled. "Then you don't understand victory yet." He glanced toward the doorway, where Alara slept, curled up with her bear. "I think I'm starting to," he said. Later, as he prepared for bed, another wave of memories surged. But this time, they didn't frighten him. They felt distant, like shadows that no longer had power. Because now, he knew exactly who he was. Not the billionaire, not the tycoon, but a father, a neighbor, a builder of second chances. And whatever tomorrow brought, he was ready. 5 years passed quietly, not in headlines, not in boardrooms, not in the glare of flashing cameras, but in classrooms filled with laughter,
in kitchens scented with warm meals, in streets where children rode bicycles without fear. The community Silas had helped build now stretched across several neighborhoods. What began as a single act of compassion had become a living network of hope. Homes, schools, clinics, training centers, and gardens blooming in places once forgotten. Silas no longer woke to the sound of ringing phones and urgent demands. He woke to soft footsteps, the smell of toast, and the gentle voice of Alara calling, "Dad, you're going to be late for breakfast." At 13, Alara had grown into a thoughtful, confident girl. She excelled in school, volunteered at the clinic, and spent hours reading to younger children in the community library. Mrs. Finch, now strong again, served as head teacher of the learning center. Her classrooms were always full. Adults who once struggled to read now wrote letters, filled out job applications, and helped their children with homework. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold, Silas and Alara sat on the porch of their modest home, watching families stroll through the neighborhood. "Do you ever miss your old life?" Alara asked quietly. Silas thought for a moment. "I remember it," he said, "but I don't miss it." "Why not?" "Because I was rich in money," he replied, "but poor in everything else." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "And now?" "Now," he said softly, "I'm rich in the only ways that matter." That night, Silas opened the small leather journal he had kept since the accident. Its pages held fragments of fear, confusion, gratitude, and hope. On the final page, he wrote, "I lost my memory and found my life. I once built towers of glass and steel. Now I help build homes, dreams, and second chances. And I finally understand, real wealth is not what we own, but who we lift." Several weeks later, Alara stood on a small stage in the community square, holding a microphone with trembling hands. The annual celebration had drawn families, volunteers, teachers, doctors, and neighbors from miles away. She cleared her throat. "My teacher asked us to write about our heroes," she began. "Some kids wrote about famous athletes. Some wrote about movie stars." Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. "I wrote about my dad," she said simply. Silence fell. "Before I met him, I lived under a bridge. I thought I was invisible. But he saw me. And because he saw me, my life changed." She turned to Silas, standing in the back. "He taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about love. He taught me that kindness can rebuild a whole world." Her voice quivered. "And he taught me that no matter how broken someone feels, they can always choose to become better." Applause thundered across the square. Silas felt tears slide freely down his cheeks. Later that night, as lanterns glowed softly, music drifted through the air, Silas stood alone for a moment, looking across the community. Hundreds of windows shimmered in the darkness. Each light represented a family no longer afraid, a child no longer hungry, a future no longer lost. And in that quiet moment, Silas finally understood. The accident hadn't taken his life. It had given it back. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe to help spread kindness. And you? Who do you want to truly see today?